In the summer of 2022, the skeleton of a man who had been missing for about 4 years was begin in the Yosemite Mountains. The case could accept been bankrupt if it weren't for one detail that beatific a chill down the spines of accomplished rangers. The tourist's haversack containing documents, a phone, and a baptized bottle was not lying abutting to the basic in a deep crevice. It was continuing cocked at the actual bend of the cliff. It had not fallen or slid down. It had been carefully placed there, as if Edition had seen the man off on his final journey and again angry about and left. This story is not about how the wilderness claims the careless. It is an adventure about an analysis that aloft added questions than it answered. About a case that was officially bankrupt as an accident, but which rangers still buzz about, adding one abominable detail. It wasn't the Aboriginal time. It all started in October 2018. 32-year-old Andrew Taylor was an experienced hiker. He wasn't a novice seeing the mountains for the Aboriginal time. He knew what he was accomplishing and loved hiking alone. For him, it was a way to recharge, to get abroad from the hustle and bustle of the city. His destination this time was Yosemite Civic Park. Specifically, the acclaimed Broom Trail leads to the abject of the massive granite rock accepted as Half Dome. The plan was simple. Walk to the affected in Yosemite's little valley, leave best of his gear there, and accomplish a adorable ascend the next day. He told a few accompany about his plans, gave them the exact route, and his accepted acknowledgement date. He promised to be in draft no afterwards than Sunday evening, October 21st. Sunday passed. Monday came. There was no alarm or message from Andrew. At first, his friends weren't too worried. Anything can arise in the mountains, no cell service, so I absentively to break an extra day. But back Monday anesthetized and Andrew's phone was still out of range, they started to panic. On Tuesday morning, October 23rd, they alleged Yosemite Park's emergency services. The alarm was taken very seriously. Tourists' activity missing on this avenue were not uncommon, but it always appropriate an actual response. The Aboriginal affair the rangers did was check the parking lot at the alpha of the absent trail. Andrew's car was still there. A dejected Honda locked. This was the first admonishing sign. It meant that he had definitely entered the esplanade and had not left. The chase and accomplishment operation began immediately. The standard procedure in such cases is to Aboriginal work out the best acceptable avenue taken by the missing person. Dozens of rangers and volunteers began combing the missed trail. It is one of the best popular trails in the park, but additionally one of the most treacherous. The being accomplished carved directly into the bedrock are constantly wet from the aerosol of adolescent and Nevada waterfalls. One amiss footfall and you could slip and fall. Rescuers questioned all the tourists they encountered and showed them a photo of Andrew. He was tall, athletic, with a photic beard and a confident gaze. Some recalled seeing a guy who looked like him walking up the trail, but no one could say annihilation specific. Hundreds of bodies anesthetized through here every day. On the additional day of the search, a helicopter abutting the operation. It circled over the valley, over the abounding slopes and granite domes, aggravating to atom article from the air. A ablaze atom of a jacket, a glint of equipment. But Yosemite is an all-inclusive area. Tens of bags of acreage of rocks, forests, and canyons. A being actuality is a tiny dot calmly hidden. The key discovery was fabricated on the third day. One of the chase parties advancing toward Little Yo's Basin apparent Andrew's camp. It was actually breadth that should have been according to his plan. The tent was neatly pitched. Inside was a sleeping bag, a mat, several canicule worth of food, and a book. Aggregate was in its place. There were no signs of a struggle. No signs that a buck or other wild beastly had been there. The camp looked as if its buyer had aloof stepped out for a brace of hours and was about to return. This analysis both helped and complicated the search. On the one hand, it was now ablaze that annihilation had happened to Andrew on his way to the camp. He had auspiciously navigated the most arduous allotment of the Broom Trail, an accustomed abject camp. On the other hand, it meant that he was lost somewhere added on, best acceptable during his ancillary cruise to Halfme. The search concentrated on this area. It is a vast territory with abundantly complex terrain. The Isle to Half Dome is no walk in the park. It is a serious challenge. The final allotment of the route involves a ascend up and about sheer cliff utilizing metal cables for support. Rangers thoroughly searched every inch of this climb. They looked into every crevice and advised the slopes below the cliff. Dog handlers abutting the search. Dogs accomplished to chase for people combed the backwoods at the basal of the mountain, But time afterwards time they returned empty-handed. The acclimate began to deteriorate. October in the Sierra Nevada mountains is unpredictable. A clear, brilliant day can turn into algid rain or a like snow. The search was acceptable, increasingly dangerous for the rescuers themselves. A week passed. No traces, not an atom of clothing, no alone equipment, no traces of blood, annihilation at all. Andrew Taylor seemed to accept vanished into thin air. The animate appearance of the chase and rescue operation was officially suspended afterwards 10 days. This is accepted practice. It is impossible to accumulate hundreds of people and accessories in the acreage forever. The Rangers larboard the case as a limited continuous search, which in practice meant that if Addition accidentally stumbled aloft any traces, they would respond. But no one was actively looking for him anymore. For Andrew's ancestors and friends, it was an adverse blow. Their achievement boring faded, replaced by agonizing uncertainty. Months passed, then years. Andrew Taylor's adventure became one of Yosemite's abounding mysteries. One of those beliefs that rangers acquaint around the bivouac to new advisors as a warning. A guy came, larboard his car, set up camp, and disappeared. The wilderness had won. That's what anybody thought. The approach was analytic and straightforward. He apparently slipped off a bluff about off. The Capitol Trail fell into one of the hundreds of deep creases or canyons, and his anatomy was simply absurd to find. An accident. Tragic, but understandable. Life in the Esplanade went on as usual. Thousands of new tourists came and went. The name Andrew Taylor was gradually forgotten, actual alone a band in reports and an affliction in the hearts of his loved ones. No one could accept absurd what a strange and alarming band-aid to this story was cat and mouse in the colligiosity of the granite cliffs. A adumbration that would casting agnosticism on the simple adaptation of a draft and force a new attending at what seemed to be a closed case. About 4 years had passed, for continued years of blackout and uncertainty. The summer of 2022 was arid and hot. August 2022. The calefaction and drought acquired abounding streams in Yosemite to dry up, and the snow fields that usually lay in adumbral crevices throughout the year broiled significantly. A accumulation of park geologists was administering a routine survey of the breadth abreast Yosemite's little valley abroad from the Capitol tourist trails. They were believed the action of the rock formations and Arctic marines. The assignment was accepted until one of the specialists noticed article out of place on a granite ledge. It was a ablaze dejected article that stood out adjoining the gray bedrock and sparse vegetation. Moving closer, the geologists saw that it was a day-tripper backpack. It was just standing on a collapsed apparent a few meters from the bend of an abysmal but actual narrow crack in the rock. The aboriginal anticipation was that some day-tripper had larboard it there and walked away. However, the haversack was covered with a attenuate band of dust and pine needles, advertence that it had been lying there for added than a day, possibly a week. It was in surprisingly acceptable condition. The zippers were absolute, and the bolt had not been broken by animals. One of the geologists cautiously unzipped the Capitol compartment. Inside was a baptized bottle, a map, a small flashlight, and a wallet. In the wallet was a driver's authorization acceptance to Andrew Taylor. The name was immediately recognized by the chief Esplanade staff. It was the aforementioned guy who had gone missing almost 4 years ago. The find instantly accomplished to be justified and became an abomination scene. The aggregation baton contacted the Central Ranger Base via radio. The coordinates were relayed and everyone was ordered not to draft annihilation until the analysis aggregation arrived. While they waited, the geologists advised the area. Again, one of them approached a crack with a haversack lying at the edge. He looked down. The fissure was aphotic and narrow, no added than bisected a beat wide. At an abyss of about 4 m at the bottom, stuck amid the bedrock walls, lay something white. Looking closer, he realized what it was. It was bones. A human skeleton. News of the discovery spread instantly through the park. The Andrew Taylor case was reopened. A special aggregation consisting of rangers, investigators, and abundance rescue specialists accustomed at the scene. First, they cordoned off the breadth and carefully documented aggregate as it was found. The area of the haversack was the most analytical question. It was standing upright. It wasn't lying on its ancillary as if it had formed down. It wasn't wedged between rocks. It was continuing as if someone had placed it there. The second thing was the able itself. It wasn't on the avenue to Hafty. It was off to the side in a abode breadth no one would accidentally wander. To get there, You had to advisedly leave the aisle and walk several hundred meters across rugged terrain. The operation to recover the charcoal was difficult. Climbing equipment had to be used. One of the rescuers was bargain bottomward on ropes. The remains, which had been lying in the creasse for about 4 years, were mostly skeletal. Their clothes had practically disintegrated beneath the access of moisture and time. The accretion took several hours. Anniversary cartilage was carefully packed for added examination. At the same time, addition accumulation of investigators was animate above. They combed every inch about the able in search of clues. And they found something that fabricated this adventure even stranger. Right at the bend of the able breadth the backpack had been, on an attenuate band of soil and dust that had accumulated on the granite, there were 2 symmetrical, slightly biconcave marks. These were not boot prints. The appearance was different. Oval smoothed out. Afterwards careful analysis, the board accomplished the only accessible conclusion. These were indeed knee marks. Addition had been kneeling on the actual bend of the precipice. This detail did not fit into any of the theories. If Andrew had lost his basement and fallen, breadth did the knee marks arise from? If he had jumped, why would he accept knelt down? And most importantly, who had placed the backpack nearby? No shoe prints acceptance to anyone abroad were found. The rocky surface does not absorb prints well. In 4 years, any traces could except been destroyed by rain and wind. The knee marks were preserved alone by a miracle in a slight abasement breadth. They had not been done abroad by water. Thus, the investigation had the afterward picture. Andrew Taylor's anatomy at the basal of a deep crevice, his backpack, complete and undamaged, was continuing on top, and next to the haversack were animal knee prints. It was an arena that did not arise to be an accident. The charcoal were beatific to the coroner's appointment for forensic examination. Everyone was cat and mouse for the results that could afford a blaze on what happened to Andrew on that October day in 2018. Pathologists had to appraise the bones for fractures, cracks, or any other damage that could announce the account of death. The rangers animate at the site no best believed the adventitious fall theory. There were 2 abounding butts, the backpack, the knees. The area of the able is abroad from the trail. In their conversations with each other, a chat that no one capital to say aloud in official letters was being used added and added often. Murder. But if that was the case, who? And more importantly, why would addition annihilate an ordinary day tripper in one of the world's most acclaimed civic parks? The answer, or rather the abridgment thereof, would prove even added advancing than the discovery itself. The essay of the basic began. The results of the argumentative essay were the final aspect that angry this story from a tragedy into an absolute puzzle. Pathologists anxiously advised every bone in Andrew Taylor's body, and their conclusion was absolute and shocking. There were actually no signs of trauma on the skeleton that would be consistent with the abatement from a height. None. To understand how aberrant this is, imagine what happens to the anatomy back it falls from an acme of 4 meters assimilate rocks. At the actual least, there would be broken ribs, pelvic bones, and limbs. Often, there would be cracks in the skull. Andrew's skeleton was intact. His ribs were intact. His skull had no damage. The continued basic of his accoutrements and legs were also unbroken. This conclusion completely destroyed the best logical version. An accident. A being could not fall into a 4M able and not ache a single fracture. It defied the laws of physics. So, how did his anatomy end up at the bottom? Backboard compared the pathologist's allegation with the evidence begin at the scene, a neatly standing haversack and knee marks at the edge. A distinct but absolutely agrarian picture began to emerge. It seemed as if Andrew's anatomy had not fallen, but had been anxiously bargained down. As if someone or article admiration at the edge had bargained him into this narrow stone well. However, this adaptation also left abounding questions unanswered. Was Andrew animate at that moment? There were no signs of an attack or abandon on the bones, no knife cuts or marks from blows, but that accepted nothing. The cause of afterlife could accept been suffocation or poisoning, which leaves no marks on the bones. Perhaps he died of accustomed causes such as an affection attack and addition begin his anatomy and decided to coffin him in such an aberrant way. But why? Why lower the anatomy into a able and leave the haversack in apparent sight? It didn't assume like an attack to adumbrate the evidence, but rather some affectionate of ritual, an awful and incomprehensible message. The analysis had nothing. No suspects, no motives, no witnesses. Just an agglomeration of strange, incompatible facts. In the end, with no affirmation to suggest an agitated death, the case was closed. The official account of Andrew Taylor's death accident. The address was vague. Afterlife by fall, alike admitting the coroner's address anon contradicted this. It was easier for the arrangement that way. No affirmation of murder, accordingly no murder. The case was beatific to the archives, but that's breadth the official adventure ends and the actionable one begins. The one you won't acquisition in the papers. In conversations with old rangers, those who accept formed in Yosemite for 20 or 30 years, one detail emerges. The Andrew Taylor case was not different to them. Over the accomplished 2 decades, at atomic 3 similar cases except occurred in the same area of the Esplanade abreast Yosemite's Little Valley and the John Muir Trail. In each case, abandoned tourists, primarily men, went missing. And in anniversary case, their remains were begin years afterwards in places that were difficult to ability by accident, in deep crevices, hidden caves, or under piles of rocks. Anniversary time the examination showed no signs of trauma from abatement, and the affairs of the discovery were aberrant and illogical. These cases were never officially linked. Anniversary was absolved as an accident. However, for those who know the mountains, this alternation of events appears to be an apocalyptic pattern. Officially, Andrew Taylor is the victim of an adverse accident. Unofficially, he is fourth on the list.